Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer, and I'm podcasting from Ma'ale Adumim in Israel. We like to believe, with our great knowledge of everything and our vast technology that puts literally everything in the palms of our hands, that we have finally achieved the age-old goal of mastery over the world. This was the old biblical promise: be fruitful and multiply, and fill the world and subdue it. We certainly were fruitful and multiplied. We can rightfully claim that we have filled the world, and many would assert that we have succeeded in subduing it to complete the Triple Crown. But we all know that there is so much in our world that is beyond our control. We may have deluded ourselves that because we created medicines which can cure some diseases, that we have at last conquered the evil of illness. We may have convinced ourselves that since we have mastered the power of many forms of energy, which ease our lives almost infinitely and enable us to do virtually anything we wish, that we are invincible. We certainly have proven to ourselves that the invention of the computer and all its vast scope of related thinking machines, that we now have a substitute for the fickle moods and workings of the mind, which will usher us into a glorious era of superhumans, human but infallible in everything we touch. But as tempting as it is to believe all that, we all know that it is no more real than a dream that floats away like dust in the wind. The more diseases we cure, the more dread we feel of being stricken by one of those we haven't quite licked. The more energy we harness, the more dependent we are on its destructive and addictive power that it brings us, and the more we sense that we will never have enough. The more we sink ourselves into that digital rabbit hole, the more we seal the fate of our minds as obsolete relics of a bygone era when we actually had to think and act to make our lives worthwhile. Instead, we are consigning ourselves to a life of perpetual servitude, to something that cannot ever know what it means to be a human being. The more we realize this puzzling paradox of human ingenuity, never really solving our most fundamental dilemmas and only making them worse, the more we grasp at straws to find salvation from those dilemmas. It may be in the forms of some political or social belief that somehow takes hold of a significant segment of the population, promising a utopia if we just accept it and don't look back. It may be some new drug or some new invention that supposedly guarantees our security or comfort or fulfillment. It may come in the form of an idea or a trend that takes hold and promises to save our souls and grant us everlasting happiness. The human need for these proverbial straws is one of our longest lasting traits as human beings. When so much of the world was clearly far beyond our control, we couldn't live without something to grasp, to anchor us to some sense of security. This was how much of religion was created. It was a way to believe that things were under some sort of benevolent or malleable deity who could make our lives easier if we did what they wanted. Even the belief in the godlike power of the human mind is such a straw. We grasp it because it has and does get us out of countless personal and societal jams, and we trust that it will continue to be a respectful substitute for the old deities. But it is really nothing more than another one of those old straws. The Bible has plenty of examples of these straws. The ancient idolatrous practices were nothing but desperate hopes for assistance from some mysterious source. Even the ritual sacrifices of the Israelites were eventually seen as substitutes or distractions from true belief in God. The golden calf was the epitome of grasping at straws, but it really just followed a pattern of seeking salvation when none was forthcoming. The long sections of rebuke found at the end of the books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy speak to this constant need to grasp at anything, even when there is nothing to grasp at. This week's Parsha is called Chukat. That word means law or law of. It introduces a certain odd series of ritual laws that puzzles even those who know all their details. It is essentially a ritual for dealing with the spiritual impurity of contact with the dead body. This dreaded inevitable feature of biblical life was considered the ultimate form of contamination. It had to be washed away in some manner, or else that contamination would linger on in the person affected like a contagious infection. The law introduced by the word, which is the title of this week's parsha, is that very cleansing process. It is called the para aduma, or red heifer. It involves raising a perfectly red cow, slaughtering it, burning it, mixing its ashes with a few other specific items, and sprinkling it on the affected person 2 times in a week. If all this sounds weird and incredibly antiquated, it is. This one is about as strange as it gets in the Torah. Even the Talmudic rabbis were baffled by all this and considered it to be something that simply had to be accepted as is, with no hope of ever truly understanding how it worked. Once this topic is over, the Parsha goes into narratives that span an approximately 40-year period. This period thus covers most of the time that the Israelites were wandering around the wilderness. It is not easy to see the timeline, as it is buried in between a couple of verses. But if one pays close attention, it can be seen that about 38 years are skipped over in the blink of an eye. The narratives cover incidents of complaints about water and food. There is one where Moshe suffers his greatest failure as a leader, succumbing to his anger over the endless griping about one thing or another and losing his cool in front of everyone, including God. There are encounters with nations on the outskirts of the Promised Land, some of which involve negotiations and some which involve war. The wars are the first of the great battles to conquer the land of Canaan and to make it into the land of Israel. These wars are astoundingly successful as the Israelites conquer a great deal of land outside the eastern border of Israel. This land would become expanded territory from the original land of Israel. 2.5 tribes would settle there for several hundred years until it was almost indistinguishable from the Holy Land itself. In the middle of all this is a small incident that is so strange that most don't make any attempt to understand it in the slightest. It follows after the first of those wars, a battle with a Canaanite tribe in the southern portion of what would become Israel. This battle itself followed the death of Aaron, the brother of Moshe and the high priest. Whether his death led to panic or discouragement is unclear, but there is no question that a sense of disquiet and rebellion was in the air. This came out in the form of complaining about the staple food of the Israelites for the entire 40-year period of wandering in the wilderness, the manna. It seems to be a repetition of a long series of complaints that began right after the Exodus. Quote, "Why did you take us out of Egypt to die in the desert? There is no bread and no water, and we are disgusted with this insubstantial bread." The insubstantial bread they are referring to is traditionally identified as the manna, which was probably something like eating blue-green algae or some other superfood. As a consequence of this gripe was an invasion of poisonous snakes. These snakes seemed to come out of nowhere, but the Torah states that they were sent by HaShem. There were fatalities from the snake bites. The people then approached Moshe and confessed their sin in speaking against God and him. They asked him to pray to HaShem on their behalf to remove the snakes from their midst. Moshe's prayers were successful, or so it appears. God gave him the surprising command to construct some sort of image of a snake and place it on a banner or pole with the amazing instruction that, quote, "Everyone who is bitten will look at it and live." Moshe made this image of a snake out of copper and placed it on a pole. This little section concludes with the remarkable statement, quote, "If a person would be bitten by a snake, they would look at the copper snake and survive." The Parsha moves on to something unrelated to this in the next verse. The copper snake is never heard from again in the Torah or the rest of the Bible. There is an ancient rabbinic tradition that it survived intact until late in the First Temple period, when King Hezekiah had it hidden away since it was being treated as a kind of idol. This is not altogether surprising, being as that is what it appears to have been. What else would we call a copper statue that has these apparently miraculous healing powers? The amazing feature about this statue is that it was explicitly commanded by HaShem and made by Moshe. How is this to be explained? The traditional rabbinic explanation is that the statue had no power whatsoever, other than directing the gaze of the infected person to the heavens so that they would seek help from God. While this solves this sticky problem of authorized idolatry in the Torah, it certainly stretches credulity. There is nothing in the verses to indicate that the statue had any power and that it was all a trick to get people to look at God or to look for God. But what else could it be and remain kosher according to the strict monotheistic standards of the Torah and of Judaism? There is no great answer to this question. It appears to be a case of divinely sanctioned grasping at straws that worked. This was the type of straw that worked in those times. It wasn't the latest gadget, but an image to stare at and hope for the best. Even HaShem understood that nothing short of this would work to get these people out of their self-caused jam. They had generated this problem for themselves, and they would have to be subject to the appropriate means of extricating themselves. How did it work? Who knows? Perhaps it was an ancient form of a placebo. Perhaps they really did believe it would work, and then, lo and behold, it did. If anything we get out of this strange incident, it is the idea that even God recognizes that we can only believe what we were capable of believing. If they needed a statue to focus their attention on the seriousness of the snake danger, so be it. Would things have been better if they truly looked to God for assistance? Of course, but they weren't equipped for such lofty spiritual standards. They needed something real like a copper statue of a snake. They needed a straw to grasp. This much has survived the 3,000 or so years since that incident. Some things never change. Shabbat Shalom.